want you to imagine you were talking to a police officer on a good level, all right? May not have always been the case, but this is the case. You're really trying to find out how the police officer goes about doing his job on a daily basis, and so you're interviewing and saying, tell me about your job, and the police officer says, well, I like to go out every day where the criminals are. You go, oh, great. That's exactly what I want the police officer doing, right? Going out where the criminals are, getting them. And so you say, well, can I ride along with you tomorrow and see how you go find the criminals? Sure, I have no problem. I find criminals every single day. Just hop in the car. So you hop in the car the next morning, you ride with the police officer, and you pull up in front of the jail. Now you're starting to get a little nervous, right? All right? And you go into the jail, and he sits down in a chair, and he goes, here's where I go. There's criminals everywhere. I just sit here and watch them all day, make sure they don't get away. You say, well, don't we have jailers for that? Yeah, but as a police officer, I'm supposed to go where the criminals are, so that's what I'm doing. Now, how many of you would think that police officer was actually doing his job? You'd say, no, those people are already caught. Those people are already taken care of. They're already there. We want you going out and finding the other ones that need to be in there. We want you to find somebody to put in there with them, not to sit and watch the ones that have already been caught. Yet a lot of us act like Satan is this police officer I'm describing. We act like evil and Satan works only in the world and the church is exempt. And so we think that Satan wakes up in the morning and says, well, I got to leave all those church people alone. I'll go out here in the world where all the other people are. But the truth is, outside of Christ, people are already enslaved by sin. They're already trapped. They're already, to some degree, a lot of them hopeless and despair. In other words, Satan has already worked his evil magic on them. And so, much like the people that are in jail now, Satan's not as worried about them as he's worried about, guess who? Those who are trying to get away from him. Those who are trying to break free. Those who have been set aside by God. Because those who have been set aside by God are those whom he has lost. And he wants them back. He doesn't want them back because he really likes you or because he really cares about you or because you're important to him. He wants you back because getting you back hurts God. And all he cares about is hurting God. He doesn't care a bit about you. But if getting you can hurt God, then he wants you back. But sometimes I think we get kind of complacent in the church and we start thinking that once we're in the church, we don't have to worry about Satan anymore. He's not here. He's not irrelevant. He doesn't show up. We're all good. We're all safe. We're all fine. Let's just stay here and we don't have to worry about it. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, that is not at all what Paul says. In fact, Paul begins to talk about what's happening in the Corinthian church. And there's a lot of stuff been going on in the Corinthian church. All right, this is not a group of people who has it all together. They have all kinds of issues and they have all kinds of problems. And they range from outright sin in the middle of their assembly that people are ignoring to people teaching different things, all kinds of stuff going on. But primarily, Paul wants to talk about the fact that they are beginning to believe the gospel is different than what he preached it to them to be. They're looking at this good news that God had given them, and they're beginning to twist it until it's different. In fact, Satan uses the same kind of tools to hurt us in the church that he uses to hurt us outside of the church. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Paul taught a gospel that included forgiveness. That was central to Paul's gospel. You have been forgiven. Over and over again, Paul reminds them that they have been forgiven. He talks a lot about freedom. There's all of this freedom in the gospel. And Paul talks about liberty and freedom and how you're to use your liberty and freedom. And he also talks about, particularly, that God supplies what's needed. That God is the giver of the gifts that the church needs. Whether those are material gifts or spiritual gifts, it's irrelevant to Paul. They're supplied. In fact, in this very chapter, he tells the Corinthians, he says, guess what? When I came to preach to you, you didn't have to pay a dime. You know why you didn't have to pay a dime? God got somebody else to pay it for you. God supplied the opportunity for you to hear the gospel. So Paul is all about this idea of freedom. And he wants them to understand, and he becomes concerned that they are not operating under this understanding of the gospel that he left with them. So I want to look at a few verses in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. In verse 4, Paul says this, "For if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you have received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you seem to put up with it easily enough." In other words, somebody's coming in and saying, okay, let me tell you, this freedom's too free, or this forgiveness is too good, or this expectation that God is going to supply things is too ambitious. They're coming and they're trying to change the message that Paul gave. And in that, Paul says, why do you want to exchange the message I gave you for something else? Let's look at what you're trading the gospel for. And then he jumped down to verse 13. He describes the people who are doing this preaching. He says, "For such men are false prophets, deceitful workmen, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then if his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness, and their end will be what their actions deserve." In other words, Satan's not beyond doing what? Pretending to be God's person. Now, he's not. You ever been around somebody who's completely fake? Yeah? Somebody who is absolutely, teetotally, 100% fake. And in fact, you know that what they are around you is not what they are around anybody else. All right, let's be honest. How many of us at some time in our life have been fake? All right? We have pretended to be somebody we were not. And for a little while, what can you do? You can pull it off, can't you? You can trick people, you can fool people, and somebody will come up and say, "Oh, did you hear about Arvel? Oh, no, Arvel would never be like that. I know him." Well, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. If he's been being fake, I'm wrong, right? He's fooled me. How do we know? Well, eventually they show themselves. Satan already has the world in his grasp. Now he wants the church in his grasp. So he will position himself as somebody who believes in God, who is fake, to try to influence us into a form of Christianity that does not allow us to grow, but instead chokes us out. And what will eventually happen, if that happens, is we leave believing in Jesus Christ. Or we at least leave obeying Him. We're going to talk about his tools because he goes one more verse. It says in verse 20, "In fact, you have even put up with people who entice you and enslave you, with people who exploit you, who take advantage of you, who push themselves forward above you, or who slap you in the face." Wow, that's pretty direct, isn't it? What do you suppose would have happened if I'd walked in here today and I just walked up and every man I walked up to, I just slapped him in the face? How many would I go through before somebody hit me back? Yeah, I guess it depends on who I pick first, right? You know, I might have somebody who said, "All right, I'm not going to hit him." But I bet I wouldn't get through 5 before somebody hit me back. And I bet if they hit me back and I kept slapping people, somebody's going to drag me out of the church and say, "Okay, we got to fix this." We don't like being hit or slapped, do we? Do you like being enslaved? Do you like feeling trapped and you can't get out? No. Do you like being exploited? Do you like knowing that somebody is using you and you can't do anything about it? Do you like people who you know are using you only for their benefit and they could care less about you? This is the description of the tools that Satan is using in the church. Isn't it a pretty apt description of the tools that Satan used while we were in the world? When we were outside of the church, did Satan not enslave us with sin? Did Satan not exploit us for his own purposes? Did he not take advantage of us? And even beyond hurting us, did he not use us to hurt other people? Did Satan not do all of that in the world when we were in the world? It is no surprise that he will do that in the church as well. And I want us to spend a little bit of time looking at these tools of Satan. The first one is that he enslaves us. Do you know how in Christianity Satan can enslave us? Well, the first way is to convince us that we've got to earn our salvation. We are given salvation by Jesus Christ. We don't earn it. It is not something we could ever earn. When we are convinced we got to earn our salvation, we got to do enough good works to be saved. We got to do enough good things. I was talking to somebody the other day who said, well, my belief is my good things have to outweigh my bad things and I'll be okay. Well, if that is your model, then you're always working to hope to be saved, and you're enslaved by good works, are you not? Now imagine this. Imagine a guy comes up to you and he says, I tell you what, I'm going to give you $10 million. But what I want is I want you to take that $10 million, take just enough for you to live comfortably on, and I want you to go out and do good with all of the rest of it. You won't ever have to work again in your life. You won't ever have to worry about money. You can just take what's left and you can go out and do all kinds of good stuff with it. Sounds good, right? Anybody sign up for that job? I would. But you say, no, you know what? I tell you what. I'm not going to take your $10 million. Instead, I'm going to go get a job for minimum wage. And when I save up enough, then I'll start doing good works for people. All right, first off, you're not ever going to earn enough to do good works for people, right? Not like you would with $10 million. But how many of us are saved and then we've been convinced that we've got to earn our salvation? That if we don't work hard enough, we can't do good for other people. And we look at our life and we say, oh, well, I can't go do this or I can't go do that. Do you not know what I've been? Do you not know the bad I've done? Do you not know that the good doesn't outweigh the bad? Do you not? And we come up with all of these excuses. And we sell ourselves back into a bondage. A bondage where we are so worried about our salvation that we aren't free. We aren't free to do the things that God wants us to do. He says, secondly, that Satan exploits us or he takes advantage of us. The world is full of people who use Christianity to get ahead. It may be that they're taking our donations to buy air-conditioned doghouses. Now you have to be a little bit older to remember that one, right? But you remember the people who took all of these donations for missions, and when they got found out, they actually had doghouses in their backyard that had air conditioners in them so that their dogs wouldn't get too hot. I'm pretty sure that's not the intent of the people who wrote the check and sent it into the ministry. That doesn't mean everybody's like that, but it does mean there are people who use Christianity and take advantage of people who believe in Jesus Christ. Let's even make it more simple. If you are really a Christian, are there going to be people who take advantage of your good nature? There will be. Are there going to be people who take advantage of your giving spirit? There will be. In fact, Satan in the church and out of the church can use that whole idea of gullible people and lets folks take advantage of us. And so it's no wonder that when we try to follow Christ, that along will come people who claim to be Christians who will not be looking out for our best interest, but they will be looking out for their best interest. They will be looking out for what they can gain out of that whole process. And so much like the story of all the little old ladies who wrote checks to that ministry that bought the air-conditioned doghouses, people who gave out of their poverty because they thought they were going to bless somebody only to be taken advantage of, Satan can come in the church and do that. And we should question our motives when we're doing things. They push themselves forward. People who are in Christianity only because they feel like it elevates them. It promotes them. It gives them something to be proud of. Okay? And Paul was all too familiar with these people who would come in and claim to be apostles. They would claim to be teachers. They would say they were this. They would say they were that. But they weren't really in it for the good of the congregation. They were in it, rather, so that they would be recognized as an apostle. So they would be recognized as a teacher. And so they wanted to be out front. Now let me tell you, not everybody who is out front because they are prideful. Both a leader and somebody who is using people for their own glorification may be out front. It's the motive that sets them apart. You see, a true leader is out front so that he or she can serve other people. But somebody who is proud is out front, so what? So that they can be elevated and they could care less about the other people. Or very much. You don't think this happens? How many politicians claim to be Christians during election year? I know I've had talked to several churches who said, man, we like election year because the politicians all show up and worship with us and put something in the plate. And then we don't see them until the next election year. It's using Christianity to elevate yourself. Now, that's not all people who do it. I think we might have a political person or two in the audience who does not do that, okay? But, am I wrong that there are people who do that? They use Christianity to elevate themselves with disregard for everybody else. The last one is that they accept people who slap them in the face. And when I read that, I had never seen that before until I read 2 Corinthians 11. I had never seen that phrase, slap them in the face. So I read several translations because I was like, does the Bible really say slap them in the face? And it does. It says hit you in the face, slap you in the face. I mean, that's what it says in that passage. You are accepting people who will slap you in the face. Why does somebody slap you in the face? I mean, if they're not, unless they're just really angry at you. Unless you've just really made them mad and they strike out and slap you. Otherwise, why do they slap you in the face? Is it not that they want to humiliate you? You know, they want to remind you in their mind that you really are nothing, that you don't amount to anything. And so they slap you in the face to show you that they're in control and you're nothing. You don't matter. Now that doesn't happen in the church, does it? Are there people sometimes as Christians who give a steady diet to other people who are Christians of you're worthless, you're horrible, you're no good, you're awful, you're going to hell, you got to da-da-da-da. It happens. It happens a lot that people's whole image of themselves, sometimes when they come to church, is slap, 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 and they leave church and they say, man, there's no hope for me. I could never be good enough. I could never live up to this standard. I could never be this kind of person. In fact, when we're trying to come out of these sins that the world has entangled us with, we are all too aware of our own faults, aren't we? We're all too aware of our problems. We're all too aware of what we do wrong. And as people keep slapping us in the face with it, most of the time, rather than encouraging us to get better, that pushes us to quit. It makes us feel hopeless. And it's amazing that the same feelings we can have inspired by Satan outside the church are the feelings that Satan can use to hurt us inside the church when he masquerades as an angel of light. It is often that if you interview a spouse who has been abused, what will they say? Oh, well, he or she didn't mean it. He or she really loves me. He or she really wants... they just really don't... You don't understand. And there's many people who go to a church that beats them up and they go, oh, no, but I think the church really loves me. They really don't mean it like that. They really don't... But what do we say to somebody who's continually being abused? We say, no, they shouldn't treat you like that if they love you. What should we say to people who are being abused within a church system? Love doesn't treat you like that. You know, one of the compelling stories is the woman caught in the act of adultery that's brought in front of Jesus, thrown at his feet. And they say, what should we do with her? The law says to stone her. And the law did. And Jesus was under the rule of the Old Testament law, was he not? And he knew what had happened. There were witnesses. It wasn't like it was a... Jesus never says, oh, I don't think you really did it. I think they're lying. He knew they did it. Or she did it. He knew what had happened. But what does he say at the end? Who condemns you? No one, my Lord. Then neither do I. Instead of slapping her in the face when she was down and telling her how despicable and horrible and rotten she was, Jesus says, I'm not going to condemn you. Now, he does follow up with another phrase. Go and don't sin anymore. All right? I'm not going to condemn you, but hey, don't make a habit of this. This is not what you need to do. So if all of these things are what is used by Satan to hurt us in the church, then what are we in the church? What are we supposed to be? Paul, writing to these same Corinthians over in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, he says that there are people in that church at Corinth that have been sexually immoral. There are people who have lied to other people. There are people who have stolen from other people. There are people in that congregation who've hurt other people with their greed. There are people in that congregation who are given to addiction of drunkenness. There are people who worship things that weren't really God. There are people who cheated other people out of the stuff they had. There were people in that congregation who had assassinated other people's character. Do you figure that among us today all of those things could be said? I'd imagine if we went around the room, all of those things could be said. There are some of us who have lied. There are some of us who have stolen. There are some of us who have cheated other people. There are some of us who have slandered other people. There are some of us who have been sexually immoral. There are some of us who have done all of these things that Paul listed. Paul lists all of those things and he says, here are the sins that God doesn't like. And then he says, but. I always tell the people in my office, because they're always coming in, I know you're busy, but, I know this, but, I know that, but, and my phrase is, what happens before the but doesn't really matter. Okay? In other words, if you're coming in and you're saying something but, that means you don't care about what you just said, you want what comes after the but, right? That's it. So, Paul says, hey, look, God doesn't like people who do these things. But, what God's saying is what's before the but is irrelevant. It's what's after the but that's important. Well, what's after the but? After the but, what he says is, but you were washed. You were sanctified. You were justified. In other words, you were cleaned by the blood of Christ. You were set aside for God's purposes, and God made you right. It is interesting to note that while we still struggle with these things in our life, God has already saved you. And when we can quit worrying about our own salvation, guess what it frees us up to do? It frees us up to be concerned about other people. As long as we are worrying about how we're going to be saved, guess what? It's hard to worry about somebody else being saved, right? As long as we're stressing over something in our life, you've all been there. You've all had a problem in your life that has just consumed you with worry. And how much time when you were in that situation did you have to think about somebody else's problems? Probably very little. Because you're consumed with your own issues. We all get there. It happens. We all go there. But when you're freed from that worry, isn't it amazing how much more time you have to be concerned about somebody else's situation? God is saying, look, you were all of these things, but I've taken all of that away. It's all gone. You don't have to worry about your salvation. You don't have to be concerned about your salvation. Don't let somebody come and tell you got to work harder to be saved. You're already saved. Don't tell somebody come along and say you have to give to my ministry to be saved. You're already saved. Don't let somebody come along and tell you you're not good enough because I've sanctified you, I've justified you, you're good enough. You're free from that. All of these tools that Satan is using, God says, they're all before the but. Afterwards, I have washed you. I have set you aside. I've sanctified you. I have made you right. I've justified you so you don't have to work and worry about you. I freed you from worry about you so that you can go out and worry about others to the point that you love them. And that's the gospel message that Paul tried to preach. God frees us from our sin, but He also frees us from an obsession with our own salvation. He frees us from the need to be religious by making us His people, by making us sanctified and justified. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? Let's go back. Let's say the gentleman comes with the $10 million. Says, I'm giving you $10 million. I want you to take just enough of it to live off of comfortably, and then I want you to go out and do good with the rest of it. So you sit back and go, well, let's see. You know, I think $9.5 million is what it's going to take for me to live comfortably, and then I'll spend $500,000 on doing good for other people. How many of you think that's what the gentleman really intended when he gave you the $10 million? No. You're going to say, nope, not even close, right? Oh, okay, well, hey, you know, I'm a little more generous than that person. I'm going to take 50% to make me comfortable, and I'm going to use 50%. You know, Old Testament only required 10. If I give 50%, look at me. So I'm going to take 50%. I'll just take $5 million to live comfortably, and I'll give $5 million to do good work. Boy, we'll feel good. I mean, $5 million is a lot of money. That's a lot of money to do good work. Do you still think that's what the gentleman intended when he gave you the 10? Probably not. Probably not. But what if you kept 10%? $1 million. Could you live comfortably on $1 million? Probably be a stretch for some of you, right? You know, you might have to lower your standards to live on $1 million, but you might could get by. And you gave $9 million. Well, we're getting closer. We're getting closer. We're like that. God has given us an unbelievable, priceless gift. He's given us the gift of no longer worrying about our salvation. He has given us the gift of no longer wondering whether we're going to heaven or not. He's given us the gift of no longer being scared of His judgment and no longer being worried about His penalty of death and hell. He's given us this gift where we are free from that. And He says, take this gift of freedom I have given you and go out and do good with it. So the question is, how much good are we supposed to do? How much good? Oh, well, I'll help 10% of the people I meet in my daily life, and that'll be pretty good, because the Old Testament was 10%. Or I'll be nice to 50% of the people I meet. And, if I'm nice to half the people I meet and I'm really mean to the other half, I probably break even, right? That's okay. Or do we say, God loved me, He washed me, He sanctified me, He justified me, therefore, everybody I meet is worthy of God's message. Everybody I meet is worthy of God's love, and I wish every single person I meet every day would never again have to worry about their salvation. Would never again have to worry about their relationship with God. Would never again have to worry about His judgment or His penalties, because they have been washed. They have been set aside or sanctified. They have been made righteous or justified. You see, Satan wants to masquerade as a servant of light because he doesn't like us being free. Satan wins when we worry about our salvation. Satan wins when we worry about whether God really has forgiven us or not. Satan wins when we worry, and when we worry about that, we take it out on other people. And just like when we were out in the world, sometimes Satan not only hurt us, but he used us to hurt other people. If we're not paying attention in the church, sometimes Satan not only hurts us, he can use us to hurt other people. It's only when we come in complete surrender to God and we realize that the burden of worry was lifted for us at the cross. The burden of our salvation has been taken out of our hands, and we are free, that we're able to use that freedom to bless other people. If you're here and you've not known freedom from that worry, you have the opportunity. If you can lay your head on a pillow at night and not worry a bit about your relationship with God, and not be concerned what's going to happen if you die in relation to God, and you know without a doubt that God loves you, then share that with somebody. If that's not the case with you, I promise you there's people here today who would love to share that with you. They don't want to slap you in the face. They don't want to enslave you. They don't want to lift themselves up and put you down. They only want to share with you the freedom God has given them in Christ. And you have the opportunity to talk to them, to visit with them while we stand and sing.